We're finally putting all of that mess behind us. Daniel Caldwell raised his champagne glass toward the woman beside him, the whole family watching with satisfied smiles. Here's to a clean future. No noise, no surprises. The glasses clinked, a crisp, clear sound that echoed through the elegant ballroom of the Caldwell mansion. And that's exactly when the doorbell rang. Deep, prolonged, impossible to ignore. Millie's expression tightened, visibly annoyed by the interruption. Richard, though, just smiled to himself, too relaxed, too comfortable to imagine that anything could shatter that moment. What none of them knew was that standing on the other side of that door was everything Daniel had spent years trying to erase from his past. And she didn't come alone. But before we find out how Lydia turns their whole world upside down, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button, because the full story starts right now. Today, Daniel, I'm not here as your employee. I'm here as the mother of your daughters. The alarm went off at 5 a.m. in Lydia Walker's small apartment in South Boston. She reached over and shut it off before the noise could bleed through the thin walls. The room was quiet, just the distant hum of early morning traffic outside, the street still dark. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled up her banking app, 7314 teens. She closed her eyes for a second. It wasn't enough. She had exactly 45 minutes to get ready, catch the bus, and make it to Beacon Hill on time. Millie Caldwell didn't do late. She didn't do excuses either. Outside, the morning air was sharp against her skin. Lydia pulled her thin coat tighter as she waited at the bus stop. Through the window, she watched Boston slowly come alive, leaving her quiet working-class neighborhood behind, heading toward the polished, picture-perfect streets where the Caldwells lived. "Good morning, Henry," she said, stepping through the service entrance of the pale brick mansion. "Good morning, Lydia," the butler replied, glancing at his watch. "Mrs. Caldwell wants extra attention on the upstairs bathrooms. They're expecting guests tonight." "Got it." She was already heading to the supply closet. 3 years. 3 years cleaning surfaces that would never belong to her. 3 years watching, from a careful distance, a life she would never have. She was scrubbing the hallway when Millie walked past, deep in a phone call about some charity event, not even glancing in her direction. Lydia kept working. She had gotten used to being invisible. "Need a hand with that?" She spun around. Daniel Caldwell was standing there, watching her wrestle with a heavy bucket like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm fine, Mr. Caldwell," she said, straightening up. "Daniel," he corrected, already reaching for the bucket. "Where does this go?" "Third floor," she answered, caught off guard by the gesture. He carried it up the stairs without another word. Lydia followed, uncomfortable with this unexpected break in routine. Daniel was 30, light eyes, confident posture, and the kind of easy smile that had probably opened every door he'd ever walked through. Sole heir to Caldwell Enterprises, one of the biggest names in tech. "You've been working here a while, haven't you?" he asked, setting the bucket down. "Yes." "Funny, I barely know anything about you." "There's not much to know." "I disagree," he said, with a half smile that made her look away. "Everybody's carrying a story." That night, Lydia served dinner. Richard sat at the head of the table, buried in documents. Millie picked at her food between phone calls. Daniel, every now and then, glanced over at Lydia, something his parents never did. "This salmon is excellent," Daniel said casually, his eyes meeting hers for just a beat too long. "I just served it, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, keeping her voice even. "The chef prepared it," she added quietly. "Still," he said, "the way you serve it changes the whole experience." 2 weeks later, the Caldwells were packing up for their summer house. "Daniel, aren't you coming with us?" Millie asked, watching the staff load luggage into the cars. "I need to stay and close the Thompson deal," he said. "I'll meet you there next weekend." After they left, the mansion felt different, quieter, emptier somehow. Lydia was finishing her usual rounds when Daniel appeared in the kitchen that evening, leaning against the counter like he owned the room. Which, of course, he did. "Have you eaten?" "No, Mr. Caldwell." "Daniel," he said again, "and you should eat. Actually, eat with me. I hate eating alone." They sat at the kitchen island, not the formal dining room. He opened a bottle of wine and started asking questions. The conversation came easier than it should have, and somewhere between the first and second glass, Lydia stopped guarding every word. "I was studying accounting before I started working here," she admitted. "Why'd you stop?" She hesitated. "My parents died in a car accident my sophomore year. Medical bills, the funeral. I had to drop out." Something shifted in Daniel's expression. "I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly hard." "It was," she said simply. "But everyone goes through something. Not everyone carries it the way you do," he said. The following evening he showed her his father's art collection. "My dad collects these pieces, but I don't think he actually sees them," Daniel said. "To him, they're just investments." "And to you?" "Stories," he said, stepping closer than necessary. "Every single one of them captured a real moment." A week later, a summer storm rolled in out of nowhere. Daniel found Lydia rushing to close the sunroom windows, completely soaked. "You're drenched," he laughed, handing her a towel. "Came out of nowhere," she said, taking it with a small smile. He took a step closer. "You have the most genuine smile I've ever seen." Before she could respond, he leaned in and kissed her. She knew she should pull back. He was her employer's son. Nothing good could come from this, but she kissed him back anyway. What followed was 6 months of stolen moments, late-night conversations in the kitchen, quiet walks through the garden, and eventually, evenings at Daniel's apartment when his parents were away. "Does it bother you?" Lydia asked one night, lying beside him. "The gap between us?" "What gap?" he said, tracing the line of her face with his fingers. "We're just two people, Lydia. Everything else is just noise." She wanted to believe that. For 6 months, she did. When her period was late, she bought 3 pregnancy tests. All 3 were positive. She spent 3 days trying to find the courage to tell him, holding on to the hope that he'd respond with the same tenderness he'd shown her all those months. She found him in his office on a Tuesday afternoon, his parents out at some event. "I need to talk to you," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "Of course. What's going on?" He smiled and closed his laptop. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air. And just like that, the warmth drained from his eyes. "What?" Daniel's voice dropped, like he wasn't sure he'd heard her right. "Pregnant," Lydia said again, her heart pounding in her ears. "About 8 weeks." Daniel stood up slowly and walked to the office window. He stood with his back to her for a moment, breathing, like he was trying to sort through his own thoughts before he had to say them out loud. When he finally turned around, the shock was still there. But it wasn't anger. It was something worse, a cold, uncomfortable distance. "Lydia, this changes everything. I don't know if I can deal with this right now," he said. "I wasn't ready for this." "Daniel, we had something." "Yes," he cut her off, running a hand through his hair. "But I have to be honest with you. You work here. I'm part of this family. It's not that simple." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't cruelty. But it hurt just the same. "I'm not saying you did anything wrong," he added, his voice quieter. I don't know how to handle this right now." The next morning, Lydia was called to the main foyer of the mansion. Millie Caldwell was already standing there. Perfect posture, cold eyes, every inch of her composed and controlled. "My son told me you've been making some very serious claims," Millie said, her voice too measured to be kind. "I will not allow personal situations to interfere with the professional environment of this household. Mrs. Caldwell, I never asked for anything. You're dismissed, effective immediately." Millie took one step forward. "And let me be very clear. Any future attempt to contact my family will be handled through legal channels. Are we understood?" Lydia nodded. Her throat had closed completely. From the top of the staircase, she could see Daniel watching. Silent. He didn't step in. He didn't look away either. Lydia went back to the small room she kept in the staff quarters. She folded her few clothes into a worn backpack, counted the cash she'd saved. $200. Before she walked out, she took one last look at the mansion that had been her job, and for so long her whole world. At the bus station, she bought a ticket to Portland, Maine, where her Aunt Helen lived. As the bus pulled away from Boston, Lydia pressed her hand gently against her stomach. There was a life growing there. A life that, whether the Caldwells liked it or not, would connect her to them forever. The bus rolled into Portland just before dusk. Lydia stepped off with her backpack and a crumpled piece of paper with her aunt's address. She walked a few blocks until she found a payphone. Aunt Helen, it's me, Lydia. I'm in Portland. Her voice broke. I need help. 30 minutes later, an old sedan pulled up to the curb. A woman with silver hair and warm eyes rolled down the window. Oh, honey, you look exhausted, Helen said, pushing the door open. Thank you for coming. Family shows up for family. Always. Her aunt's voice was steady and sure. Your mama would never forgive me if I left you out here alone. Helen's house was small, but it felt like a home. It smelled like coffee and fresh bread. Lydia sat at the kitchen table while her aunt put on a pot of tea. I lost my job, she started. That big house in Boston. What happened? Lydia took a slow breath. I'm pregnant. Helen sat down. And the father? The son of the family I worked for. Her eyes filled. He doesn't know what to do. Doesn't seem to want anything to do with me or the baby. Helen reached across the table and took her hand. Then we'll figure it out together. Just until I get back on my feet, Lydia said. I don't want to be a burden. Stop that, Helen smiled. This house has felt too big since your uncle passed. Stay as long as you need. 2 weeks later, Lydia found work as an accounting assistant at a local hardware store. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady. She also scheduled her first prenatal appointment at Riverside Medical Center. First pregnancy? Asked her doctor, Dr. Emily Carter, with a calm smile. Yes. Let's take a look. Dr. Carter moved the ultrasound wand slowly across Lydia's still flat stomach and stopped. Is everything okay? Lydia asked, her heart jumping. Nothing's wrong, the doctor said. It's just not what I was expecting. She turned the monitor toward her. You're carrying twins. Twins? 2 girls, Dr. Carter confirmed, still smiling. Lydia walked out of that appointment in a daze. 2 girls. She sat down on a bench in the hallway, hands resting on a belly that had barely begun to show, trying to absorb what her life had just become. That night, after Aunt Helen's house went quiet, Lydia sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in her hand. She typed messages and deleted them. Breathed. Typed again. Daniel needed to know. Not as a demand, just as the truth. She called. Daniel, she said the moment he picked up. I need to tell you something. There was a pause on the other end, too short to be comfort. Lydia, this isn't a good time. It's twins. She said it fast, before he could hang up. 2 girls. The silence stretched. She could hear him breathing. What? Are you sure? His voice dropped, a little less guarded now. Yes, I saw it today on the ultrasound. Daniel exhaled. Look, Lydia, don't call this number again, he said, his voice shifting back. My attorney will be in touch if you keep reaching out. I'm not asking for anything, Daniel, she said. I just thought you should know. I need time, he said. This is a lot. The line went dead. Lydia stared at her phone for a moment, then placed her hand on her stomach. It's just us now, she whispered. Over the following months, her body changed fast. A twin pregnancy demanded more rest, more care. Dr. Carter was straightforward about it at one of their appointments. You're going to need to slow down. Carrying 2 takes a lot more out of you. Are they okay? Lydia always asked. They're strong. Doing really well, actually. Still, by the 5th month, standing for long stretches had become difficult. Helen quietly took on more around the house without ever making Lydia feel like a burden. You're not giving me extra work, she always said. You're giving me company. Meanwhile, life in Boston went on without her. One evening, Helen came home with a magazine tucked under her arm. Lydia, is this him? On the cover, Daniel Caldwell was photographed at some corporate event, smiling beside a polished blonde woman in an elegant dress. They looked like they belonged together, confident, untouchable, worlds away. Lydia just nodded. He looks, well, Helen said carefully. He always has, Lydia answered quietly. And he moved on. In the 7th month, a routine checkup changed everything. We need to admit you right now, Dr. Carter said, after reviewing the results. So you've started contracting too early. The hospital came alive around her. Nurses, doctors, bright lights, fast footsteps. We're going to perform a C-section, the doctor explained. It's the safest option for you and the babies. Lydia felt the fear rise, but she didn't flinch. Save my girls, she said. her voice steady even through the tears. Hours later, she woke up in the recovery room. The pain was there, but the relief came first. "Lily and Grace are here, Doctor," Carter said, smiling softly. "They're small. They'll need to stay in the NICU for a little while, but they're stable. They're fighters." The tears came without warning. "Can I see them?" The next morning, a nurse walked her down to the NICU. 2 incubators side by side. 2 tiny bodies, each connected to wires and monitors, each breathing with a little help. "Can I touch them?" Lydia asked, barely above a whisper. "Of course," the nurse said gently. "They need to feel you." Lydia reached in, carefully pressing her fingertips against the softest skin she'd ever felt. Her heart felt too full for her chest. "It's the 3 of us now," she murmured, "and that's going to be enough." Lydia gently pressed her finger into the tiny palm of the first baby. The perfect little hand curled around it with surprising strength. "Hi, Lily," she whispered, her voice barely holding. Then she leaned toward the second small bassinet. "And your Grace." They were sleeping, too small for the world but alive, real, hers. The following week, a local paper ran a quiet little story. Portland woman delivers premature identical twins. Babies thriving in the NICU. Doctors call it a medical miracle. The article mentioned Lydia Walker only by her first name and respected her request to keep the father out of it entirely. The first year passed in a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, bottles warmed in a hurry, and naps stolen on the couch. Lydia learned to live in fragments of time. By the time Lily and Grace turned 1, she had already finished an online accounting certification and was working 2 jobs. During the day, she handled bookkeeping for small local businesses. At night, she waited tables at a diner that never closed. Aunt Helen watched the girls while Lydia worked. Some nights, after putting them to bed, Lydia would open her laptop and quietly follow the life Daniel Caldwell was still building for himself. She noted his promotion within the family company. She saved an article about a new social initiative sponsored by the Caldwells. She watched in silence as he appeared on covers and at events, a world she and her daughters had no part in. When Lily and Grace were approaching their 3rd birthday, Lydia read a headline that made her slowly close the laptop. "Caldwell Family Annual Christmas Charity Gala, expected to break fundraising records." That night, watching her daughters play on the living room rug, Lily stacking blocks with intense focus, Grace arranging her dolls in perfect symmetry, Lydia said, almost to herself, "I think it's time." Helen looked up from her knitting. "Time for what?" "For them to know the girls exist." Lydia took a slow breath. "For them to meet their granddaughters." "And if they don't want to?" Helen asked carefully. Lydia studied her daughters, their light eyes, their delicate features, Grace's quiet curiosity, and Lily's natural boldness. "Then at least I'll know I did everything in my power to give them the life and the legacy they deserve." The next day, Lydia bought 2 identical red velvet dresses with white collars. They weren't cheap, but they were perfect. She tucked them away carefully. She also studied the gala invitation, writing down the date, time, and address. "Boston, girls," she said a few days later, buckling them into their car seats. "We're going to visit a very important place from Mommy's life." The road stretched out ahead of them. Lily fell asleep almost immediately. Grace stayed awake, watching everything out the window. As Portland disappeared in the rearview mirror, Lydia quietly rehearsed what she would say when she came face to face with Daniel Caldwell again. This time, she wasn't the invisible housekeeper. This time, she had 2 perfect reasons to make the Caldwells see her. The drive from Portland to Boston took nearly 3 hours. Lydia kept checking the rearview mirror, watching her daughters sleep. The Boston skyline appeared just as the sun was going down. Tall buildings catching the last light against a darkening sky. "Girls, wake up," she said softly. "We're here." 2 identical little faces, sleepy blue eyes blinking up at her. "Is this where the party is?" Lily asked, always the first to talk. "Not yet," Lydia answered. "We're staying at a hotel first." She drove through streets she knew by memory, the city pulling up old feelings at every corner. She pulled into the parking lot of a modest hotel she'd found online. Nothing fancy, just enough to not drain what little she had saved. The woman at the front desk looked up in quiet surprise. when Lydia walked in with two identical little girls in matching travel outfits. "Reservation for Lydia Walker," she said, already steering the girls away from a display near the entrance. "ID and credit card, please." They were given a small clean room on the second floor, 2 full beds, nothing luxurious, just safe. "Can we jump on the beds?" Grace asked the second they walked in. "Absolutely not," Lydia said firmly. "We need to rest. Tomorrow is a very important day." That night, Lydia carefully pulled the dresses from her bag. Lily reached out and touched the fabric. "Are these for a party?" "They are," Lydia said. "A special one." "Who's going to be there?" Grace asked quietly. Lydia paused. "People who are connected to you." The next morning, Lydia was up early. She went through the folder she'd been putting together for months: birth certificates for both girls, DNA results obtained from strands of Daniel's hair she had kept, messages from their relationship, and dated photos that documented the time they'd spent together. After breakfast, she spent the rest of the day getting the girls ready and getting herself ready. She brushed their matching dark blonde hair and secured it with identical red headbands. The velvet dresses fit perfectly, making them look like something off a Christmas card. For herself, Lydia put on the only dressy outfit she owned, a simple burgundy dress she'd picked up at a thrift store. Light makeup, hair pulled back into a neat bun. "Remember what we practiced," she told them, lining them up for a final check. "When someone asks your names, you speak clearly." "Lily and Grace." "Yes, Mommy," they said together. At 6:30 that evening, Lydia buckled the girls in and drove to Beacon Hill. Christmas lights lit up the historic neighborhood. Expensive cars lined the streets near the Caldwell mansion, which glowed with warm lights and garlands. Lydia parked a block away and sat for a moment. "Okay, girls, this is it. Hold hands and stay close to Mommy." She helped them out of the car, made sure every little detail was perfect. Folder in one hand, Lily's small hand in the other, she started walking toward the mansion she knew so well. Lily held Grace's hand. The two of them moved through the cold night air in their red velvet dresses, small and perfect. Through the tall front windows, Lydia could see the elegant crowd inside. Waitstaff in black and white moved through the room with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over women in designer gowns and men in tuxedos. In the center of it all stood Daniel Caldwell, raising a glass for a toast. Beside him, Charlotte Reynolds, in a silver dress and a very large diamond ring. Lydia's heart was hammering. She walked up to the front door. The same butler who had worked there during her time as a housekeeper opened it. "Henry?" she said. His eyes went wide in recognition, and then even wider when he noticed the two identical little girls standing behind her. "Miss Walker," he managed. "I don't think I'm here for the party," Lydia said, stepping past him before he could respond. The girls followed her in, wide eyes taking in the grand foyer like they'd walked into a fairy tale. Lydia stopped at the entrance to the ballroom. Inside, Daniel was mid-speech. To new beginnings, and to leaving the past exactly where it belongs. He raised his glass to the crowd of roughly 150 guests. "Charlotte and I are so grateful to have all of you celebrating with us tonight." Lydia took one slow breath. Then she stepped forward. The girls moved with her, still holding hands, just like they'd practiced. The moment they crossed into the room, a wave of silence spread from the doorway all the way through the crowd. Conversations dropped off mid-sentence. Glasses froze in the air. Every head turned. Daniel was the last to notice. He lowered his champagne glass, his words dying on his lips as he took in the sight of Lydia, and then the two small girls beside her, with their blue eyes and dimpled chins. When his eyes met hers, and then dropped to the two identical little girls in red dresses, something in him broke. The glass slipped from his fingers. The sound of it shattering echoed through the silent room. "Meet your daughters, Daniel," Lydia said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "These are Lily and Grace." The room erupted. Whispers turned to murmurs. Charlotte Reynolds grabbed Daniel's arm, her face tight, demanding a quiet explanation. Millie cut through the crowd, her designer gown sweeping behind her, a stiff smile fixed on her face for the guests nearby. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed at Lydia, her cold eyes sweeping over the two little girls in red. "Henry, remove these people immediately." Henry hesitated, visibly at a loss. "I think we should discuss this privately," said Richard Caldwell, appearing at his wife's side. Unlike Millie, he wasn't looking at Lydia. His eyes were locked on Lily and Grace, too carefully, too intently for a man who thought this was just a social scandal. "There's nothing to discuss," Daniel said, pushing through the crowd, his voice hard. "Security, escort them out." Lydia felt the small hands tighten around hers. She didn't move. Lily and Grace stood beside her, silent, their light eyes fixed on the man who had just ordered them removed. The entire room felt frozen in time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Millie announced, stepping forward into the still stunned ballroom, her voice perfectly controlled. "We sincerely apologize for this unexpected interruption. Due to a private family matter, we'll be closing the reception for the evening." The murmuring slowly returned, mixed with curious glances and barely disguised whispers. Guests began filing out, many of them taking their time, lingering just long enough to steal another look at Lydia and the two little girls in red dresses. Elisa Westbrook's parents moved quickly to their daughter's side, murmuring something urgent in her ear as they guided her away from Daniel, their discomfort impossible to hide. In less than 15 minutes, the grand ballroom was empty. Only the Caldwells remained, and Lydia, and Lily and Grace now sitting close together, holding each other's hands. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" Millie asked flatly, the second the last door clicked shut. "Money? Attention? Is that what this little performance was about?" Lydia took a steady breath and opened the folder she'd been carrying. "I didn't come here for money. I came for something far simpler and far more important." She laid the documents on the table carefully. "Birth certificates, genetic testing, records from my relationship with Daniel. It's all here." "This is absurd," Daniel muttered, pressing a hand to his face. "Lydia, you worked for us. That's all this was." Millie moved quickly, pulling a checkbook from her clutch. "We can settle this right now. $100,000. You walk away tonight and never contact us again." "I told you," Lydia said, steady and quiet. "I'm not here for money." The tension in the room pressed down like a weight. Grace started to cry softly. Lily, confused and unsure what to do, tried to comfort her, and soon the tears spread to them both. Richard Caldwell, who had said nothing until that moment, stepped forward. He moved slowly and crouched down to the girl's level. "Hey there," he said gently. "I'm Richard. And you two, what are your names?" Lydia gave them a small, encouraging nod. "Lily," said the first, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "Grace," said the other, her voice still shaky. Richard smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. "It is so nice to meet you both." "Richard," Millie warned, her voice tight. He stood and took the folder from Lydia's hands. "Before anyone makes any decisions, we look at this properly." Daniel was pacing now, visibly torn. "This will destroy everything," he muttered. "The engagement, the company, my entire life." "Maybe," Richard said quietly. "But ignoring the truth tends to cost a lot more in the end." He flipped through the documents carefully. "They look just like you did at that age, Daniel." He paused. "And if these results are accurate, there's no room for doubt." Daniel exhaled. "Then run the tests again," he said finally. "If this is real, I need to know for certain." Millie stood watching Lily and Grace in silence. The same light eyes, the same shape of face. "How did this happen?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Lydia instinctively pulled the girls a little closer. "I didn't come here to tear your family apart. I came because my daughters deserve to know where they come from, all sides of their story." Richard handed the folder to his wife. "Millie," his voice was low but firm, "these are our granddaughters." Her hand trembled slightly as she took the papers. "We continue this tomorrow," Richard decided. "The girls are exhausted." "Where are you staying?" "The Dorchester Inn," Lydia answered. "I'll have a car pick you up at 10. We need to talk, calmly and clearly." As Lydia gathered the girls to leave, Daniel stepped into her path for just a moment. There was no anger on his face, just confusion, and something that looked almost like disbelief. "You changed everything tonight," he said quietly. "I wasn't ready for this." Lydia held his gaze. "Neither was I. When I found out, I was on my own." She paused. "But this isn't about me, Daniel. It's about two little girls who deserve answers." She walked past him toward the exit. In the minivan, as Lydia buckled Grace into her car seat, the little girl looked up at her. "Mommy, was that man mad at us?" Lydia swallowed hard. "No, baby. He's just learning something that took him way too long to figure out." Back at the hotel, the girls fell asleep almost immediately. Lydia sat down on the bathroom floor, pulled her knees to her chest and let herself cry. Quietly, finally. Alone. The next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. "Miss Walker," said the polished man standing in the hallway, offering a business card. "Samuel Whitaker, attorney for the Caldwell family." "I know. Mr. Caldwell mentioned you last night," Lydia replied. "I'm here to escort you," he said. "There's a car waiting downstairs. Give us a few minutes to get ready." As she dressed the girls in matching yellow dresses, she talked them through the day ahead. "We're going back to the big house today," she said. "There's going to be more grown-up talk, but Mommy needs you both to be on your very best behavior, okay?" "Is the angry man going to be there again?" Lily asked. Lydia paused and took a slow breath. "Yes, but remember what I told you. He's not angry at you." The sleek black car waiting outside the hotel made the girls' eyes go wide. They had never ridden in anything like it. Mr. Whitaker sat up front with the driver, while Lydia and the girls settled into the back seat. "It's so soft," Grace said, running her hand along the leather. As they crossed Boston toward Beacon Hill, Lydia felt the weight of what was coming settle over her. She had the folder. She had the proof. She just didn't know if it would be enough. The Caldwell mansion looked different in the morning light. Without the gala decorations, it was just what it had always been, a massive, imposing brick house, the same one Lydia had cleaned every single day. Henry opened the front door. "Miss Walker," he said respectfully, "the family is waiting for you in Mr. Caldwell's study." Lydia tightened her grip on Lily's hand, and Grace's, took a breath, and walked in. The house smelled exactly the same, furniture polish and fresh flowers. They followed Henry down the hallway to Richard's wood-paneled study. Inside, Richard was seated behind a large desk. Millie stood near the window. Daniel was pacing slowly near the fireplace. The room smelled like polished wood and old money. Lydia walked in with Grace's hand in her left and Lily's in her right. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward them at once. Richard, Millie, and Daniel, each carrying a different expression. Curiosity, cold distance, resistance. "Thank you for coming," Richard said, rising to his feet, the practiced warmth of a man who had learned long ago to keep feeling and protocol separate. Millie gestured toward the chairs with a short, efficient movement, like receiving unwanted visitors was simply a task to be completed. Lydia settled the girls into the large leather chairs, which seemed almost designed to swallow small people whole. Lily sat quietly, taking everything in. Grace swung her legs back and forth, her feet nowhere near the floor. "We've reviewed what you brought," Richard began, adjusting his glasses. "We'd still like to conduct our own process before making any decisions." "That's fine," Lydia said. Daniel crossed his arms. "We're wasting time. This is obviously a setup." "Daniel!" Richard's voice cut through the room, short, final. Before the tension could fully settle in, the door swung open with energy, bringing with it a light perfume and the quick sound of heels in the hallway. "I am so sorry I'm late," said the woman who walked in, shrugging off her coat. "There was an accident on the bridge. I was stuck for 40 minutes. Daniel turned, visibly caught off guard. "Naomi, what are you doing here?" "Mom called me," she said, like it was obvious. "I thought I should be here." Naomi Caldwell had the same sharp features as her mother, but where Millie carried distance, Naomi carried warmth. She crossed the room and extended her hand to Lydia. "Naomi." "His sister," she said, nodding toward Daniel with a small smile. "I think we crossed paths briefly a few years back when you came through from New York." "I remember," Lydia said. Naomi's eyes shifted to the girls. She was quiet for a moment, just looking at their small faces. "Oh my God," she murmured almost to herself. "They are absolutely Caldwell." She noticed Lily and Grace starting to show the quiet restlessness of children forced to sit still in an adult world. Without making a fuss, she went to a side drawer, pulled out some blank paper and a box of colored pencils, and set up a little corner on the floor for them. "Hey, What do you think about drawing while the grown-ups talk?" Both girls looked at Lydia. She nodded. Within seconds, Lily and Grace were on the floor, completely absorbed. "We can continue," Richard said. "Our family physician is available to collect DNA samples today if you consent." "I consent," Lydia said, "but I want to be very clear. I'm not here for money." Millie opened a folder and slid an envelope across the desk toward Lydia. "Our attorney has formalized an offer." Lydia opened it. $3 million. In exchange for permanent silence and a commitment to keep the girls away from the Caldwell family entirely. She closed the envelope and slid it back. "No. No." Millie raised an eyebrow. "I came here because my daughters deserve to know who their father is. They deserve to know their grandparents, their family, the history that belongs to them too. No amount of money changes that." "Then what exactly do you want?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "For you to acknowledge your daughters. For these girls to have a father," Lydia said without raising her voice. "It's that simple." Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and visibly lost color. "I need to step out," he said, already heading for the door. Richard watched him go. Then he turned back to Lydia. "Tell me about your life since you left here." "I live with my aunt in Portland," Lydia said. "During the day I do accounting for small businesses. At night I wait tables. I'm finishing my degree online." Richard took that in slowly. "2 kids, 2 jobs, school," he said quietly. "That's a heavy load." "You do what you have to do." A soft sound broke through the room. Everyone looked up at the same time. Grace had put down her pencils and wandered over to a grand piano tucked against the far wall. She pressed one key with a single finger, then another. She tilted her head, like she was trying to understand where the sound was coming from. Lydia started to call her back, but Millie rose first. She walked slowly to the piano and stood beside the little girl without a word. "That piano belonged to my mother," she said finally, in a voice that was slightly different from the one she'd been using all morning. Grace looked up at her. "It makes pretty sounds." Millie looked at the child for a moment longer than expected. "Yes," she said softly. "It does." And just for an instant, the hard lines of her expression softened. The door flew open. Daniel came back in, jaw tight. "Elisa Westbrook's father just called. They've heard something and they want answers before the deal meeting next week. This is going to blow up everything I've spent months building." Naomi let out a short breath. "Of course, because somehow it always comes back to you." "You don't understand what's at stake," Daniel snapped. "I understand that you have 2 daughters you've never acknowledged," Naomi said, not looking away. "That much I know." "Enough," Richard said, raising a hand. "This kind of argument isn't helping anyone." Richard turned to Lydia. "Would you mind stepping into the hallway with me for a moment?" Outside, with the door pulled halfway shut, he lowered his voice. "Lydia, regardless of how all of this unfolded, I looked at those girls and I recognized the Caldwells, I have no doubt." She nodded but said nothing. "I know you had to leave school because of a tragedy," he continued. "My own story didn't start with privilege either. I built everything I have from nothing, so I understand better than you might think what it means to start over with very little." He paused. "While we sort through the formal side of all this, I'd like to offer you and the girls one of the company's apartments. It's spacious, well located, and it'll be a lot more comfortable than any hotel." Lydia's brow pulled together slightly. "Why would you do that?" "Because those children are my granddaughters," Richard said simply. "And because someone in this family needs to start acting like it." Back in the study, he announced his decision. Daniel went still for 2 full seconds before responding. "That is a completely irresponsible call." "It's a call that's already been made," Richard said, leaving no room for debate. Millie said nothing, which in its own way said everything. Naomi drifted over to Lydia as she gathered the girls. "I'll help you get settled. The apartment is really beautiful. I promise you're going to be okay." As Lydia headed toward the exit with Lily and Grace, Daniel shifted just enough to quietly block the path. He waited until Naomi was out of earshot, then leaned in slightly. "Don't think this is over," he said, his voice too low for anyone else to catch. "My father is generous. I'm not." Lydia didn't step back even an inch. "You can push back all you want, Daniel. But the truth doesn't go away just because it's inconvenient for you. Those girls exist, and they are your daughters." She turned without waiting for a response and followed Naomi to the car. Walking out of the Caldwell mansion, Lydia felt the full weight of what she had set in motion. There was no going back now. Her daughters' lives were tied to this family, for better or for worse. The apartment was bright and open, with high ceilings and windows that framed Boston in a way Lydia had never seen before. Naomi arrived shortly after and walked her through every room with the easy warmth of someone who genuinely wanted to help. "The kitchen's fully stocked," she said, opening the cabinets, "and I made sure they brought proper beds for the girls before you got here." "Naomi, you didn't have to do all of this," Lydia said. "Of course I did," she replied simply. "They're my nieces." Lily and Grace were already running down the hallway, exploring the apartment with the completely unself-conscious curiosity that only small children have. That night, after getting the girls to sleep, Lydia sat at the kitchen table with her folder of documents. A quiet knock at the door brought her to her feet. It was Dr. James Carter, the Caldwell family physician. "Good evening, Miss Walker. I'm here to collect the DNA samples," he said, formal but kind. "The girls are already asleep. Can you do it without waking them?" "Absolutely, it's quick and painless." She walked him to the bedroom. Dr. Carter worked carefully and gently. Neither Lily nor Grace stirred. "Mr. Daniel Caldwell provided his sample earlier today," he said on his way out. "You should have results within 48 hours. 3 days later, Richard called Lydia back in. This time, it was just him, Millie, and Daniel. "The results are conclusive," Richard said, the open folder in front of him. "Daniel is the father of Lily and Grace." Daniel stood with his back to the room, staring out the window. "I already told you that," Lydia said quietly. "Yes, you did." Richard paused. "So now we need to decide how to move forward." Millie crossed her arms. "What we need to do is get ahead of this before it becomes an even bigger scandal." "It's already too late for that," Daniel said, turning around with a tight expression. "Someone talked. It's all over social media." Richard frowned. "How did this get out so fast?" "Someone from the gala must have said something," Millie said. "What matters now is deciding how we respond." Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and closed his eyes for a beat. "Elisa's father wants to meet tonight. He wants answers before the deal meeting." "Then you'll give him answers," Richard said. "The truth." Daniel let out a humorless laugh. "The truth that I have 2 daughters with the family's former housekeeper. That's really going to help close a $200 million deal." Lydia stood up. "Maybe I should step out. This feels like a family conversation." "You are family now," Richard said. "Whatever gets decided in this room directly affects you and those girls." Later that afternoon, Lydia got a text from Naomi. "You need to get out of that apartment for a few hours. Meet me on Newbury Street at 2, bring the girls." Lydia arrived with Lily and Grace in tow. Naomi was already waiting on the sidewalk in front of a children's boutique. "They need some new clothes," Naomi said, walking straight in without further explanation. "I can't afford stores like this," Lydia said, stopping at the entrance. "I'm not asking you to pay," Naomi replied. "Think of it as 3 years' worth of birthday presents I never got to give." While Lily and Grace tried on outfits with the hilarious seriousness that little kids bring to getting dressed up, Naomi eased closer to Lydia and dropped her voice. "People are talking. I've been getting messages all morning." "I'm sorry," Lydia said. "That was never my intention." "This isn't on you," Naomi said directly. "It's on Daniel. And honestly, none of this surprises me. He's always been overly protected, by my mom especially. He's never really had to face real consequences for anything." Across the city, Daniel was sitting in a private office across from Thomas Hargrove, his personal attorney. "I need to know my options," Daniel said. "How do I limit my exposure here?" Hargrove adjusted his glasses with the subtle discomfort of a man who would rather be having any other conversation. "Daniel, with 2 children and your family's assets, any judge is going to set significant support requirements. There's not a lot of wiggle room." "There has to be something," Daniel pressed. "Get her to sign something," Daniel pressed. "I need to limit my exposure here." Hargrove closed his notepad deliberately. "The DNA test confirms paternity, Daniel. No judge is going to let you walk away from your obligations. The smartest move right now is to cooperate." Across the city, While Lydia and Naomi were still on Newbury Street, Millie Caldwell was sitting in a discreet office across from David Kane, a former investigator with years of experience handling sensitive cases. "I want to know everything about Lydia Walker," she said, getting straight to the point. Kane opened his laptop without rushing. Grew up in South Boston. Father worked as a mechanic. Mother was a school secretary. Strong student. Earned a partial scholarship to Boston Community College. Lost both parents in a car accident her sophomore year. The medical bills and funeral costs forced her to drop out. She moved into domestic work and eventually applied for the position at your home. "Criminal record, debt, any issues at all?" Millie pushed. Kane shook his head slowly. "Nothing. Clean record, excellent work references. Raised 2 kids on her own in Portland, kept a stable home and completed online accounting courses on top of it." Millie pressed her lips together. That was not what she was hoping to hear. The next morning, Lydia took Lily and Grace to Boston Common. The day was surprisingly mild for December, and the park was full of families. The girls took off toward the playground the second they arrived. Lydia sat on a bench watching them when she noticed a few people nearby glancing over and whispering. A woman approached, a little uncertain. "Excuse me, are those the Caldwell girls? I saw something online." "They're my daughters," Lydia said carefully. "They're beautiful," the woman said with a genuine smile. "Don't pay attention to the gossip. People will talk about anything." From a nearby bench, another voice rang out, loud enough to be deliberate. "Some people really have no shame. We'll do anything for money." The heat rose in Lydia's face. She called the girls by name, gathered them up, and walked back to the apartment without looking back. That evening, a text from Daniel lit up her phone. "We need to talk. I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, he was at the door. He looked different. Easy smile, relaxed posture, like the past few days hadn't happened at all. "Can I come in?" he asked, in a voice Lydia knew far too well. She stepped back and let him in. Lily and Grace are in the bedroom watching a movie. Daniel walked in, glancing around the apartment. "My dad always keeps these places in good shape." He turned to face her. "Lydia, I came because I think we can handle this in a way that actually makes sense." "Makes sense," she repeated, her voice flat. "I overreacted at first, I'll admit that, but I've had time to think." He took a step toward her. "I can be present in the girls' lives. Financial support, co-parenting. We work out the details." "What changed?" she asked directly. "I have daughters," he said, his voice carefully soft. "That matters. And Elisa. Does she know about this plan?" Daniel made a vague gesture with his hand. "She'll understand. But of course, for everything to run smoothly, we'd need some formal agreements in place. Confidentiality terms, that kind of thing." Lydia crossed her arms. "You want me to sign something guaranteeing I won't embarrass you? That's what this is." The easy smile faded. "Be realistic. You're a single mother with 2 small kids. My family can make your life a whole lot easier, or a whole lot harder. That's your choice." Neither of them noticed Lily standing in the hallway in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed bear. She didn't understand the words, but she could feel that something was wrong. After Daniel left, Lily came out of the hallway and climbed into Lydia's lap on the couch, holding her bear tight. "Mommy, is that man mad at us?" she asked quietly. Lydia felt her chest tighten. "No, baby. He's just confused about some grown-up stuff." "He seemed mad," Lily insisted. "Sometimes people don't know how to show what they're feeling the right way," Lydia said softly, pulling her daughter closer. The next morning, her phone rang. "Richard." "Lydia, I needed to call you about Daniel's visit last night." She paused. "How did you know about that?" "The corporate apartments have security systems," he explained. "I reviewed the footage after Daniel described the conversation to me in a way that didn't match what I saw. I want you to know, I only monitor for safety reasons, especially with the girls there." Lydia took a slow breath, caught somewhere between embarrassment and relief. "I'd like to invite you and the girls to our summer house in Newport this weekend," Richard continued. "It'll be quieter than Boston right now, with all the media attention. Naomi will be there too." "I'm not sure Daniel would be okay with that," Lydia said carefully. "Daniel is staying in Boston," Richard said firmly. "This weekend is about getting to know my granddaughters." After she hung up, Lydia stood at the window for a moment. This wasn't playing out the way she'd expected. She had braced herself for resistance, maybe outright rejection. Not this complicated web of family dynamics she hadn't seen coming. Back at the Caldwell mansion, Millie watched Richard organize everything for the trip. She picked up David Kane's report from the desk and flipped through it one more time without a word. Then, to Richard's surprise, she closed the folder and said quietly, "I'm coming too. They are my granddaughters, after all." Daniel stood at the window of the mansion the next morning, watching the cars being loaded up. His father had been very clear. He was staying in Boston to deal with the Westbrook situation and figure out his priorities. The two cars left Boston, headed for Newport. Lydia drove with Lily and Grace, buzzing with excitement in the back seat, talking about seeing the ocean for the first time. "Are there fish?" Grace asked. "Tons of them," Lydia said, smiling at them in the rearview mirror. "Can we swim?" Lily wanted to know. "It's way too cold in December, but we can walk on the beach." After about an hour and a half, the cars turned onto a private road lined with pine trees. The trees opened up to reveal a white house facing the Atlantic, less imposing than the Boston mansion, but with a quiet, unhurried elegance that Lydia found far more beautiful. "Wow," the girls said at the same time. Richard met them in the courtyard. "Welcome to Caldwell Point. My father built this place 50 years ago." Clara, the housekeeper, showed them to the rooms upstairs. The girls shared a warm, cozy bedroom, and Lydia's room was right next door. Before the light faded, everyone made their way down the wooden staircase to the private beach. Lily and Grace ran ahead, immediately fascinated by shells and smooth, wet rocks. "This place is beautiful," Lydia said, walking alongside Richard. "It's always been my favorite," he replied. "You can actually breathe out here." Millie walked a few steps behind them, alone, until Grace came running over, holding out a perfect shell like she'd found buried treasure. "Look what I found," the little girl said, offering it up. Millie hesitated, then took it. "It's a scallop shell. See these ridges? They look just like piano keys." Grace's eyes went wide. "Like the piano at your house?" "Exactly," Millie said, and something crossed her face that Lydia had never seen there before. Back inside, while everyone was getting settled before dinner, Millie slipped away and made a quiet phone call. "Ryan," she said, lowering her voice, "I need a favor, a big one. Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" Dinner was served with the ocean right outside the window. The girls ate well after all that fresh air and running around. "Lily eats her vegetables without complaining," Lydia mentioned, when Richard raised an eyebrow at the sight. "Grace always ends up following her lead." "A natural-born leader," Richard said with a satisfied smile. "Takes after her grandfather." After Clara took the girls upstairs to get ready for bed, the adults settled in the living room with glasses of wine. "More stories came out today, on the Boston gossip sites," Naomi said. "It'll blow over," Richard said. "There's always something new for people to talk about." "I never wanted any of this kind of attention," Lydia said quietly. "I know," Naomi replied, firm and steady, casting a quick glance at her mother. Richard shifted the conversation. "You mentioned you're close to finishing your accounting degree. How many credits do you have left?" 6, Lydia said. "After that, I'd like to go for a bachelor's. With the girls' schedule, I've been thinking about corporate accounting, something with more stable hours." "That's a solid goal," Richard said, nodding with approval. The next morning, Lydia woke up to the sound of piano music drifting up from downstairs. She followed it to the living room and stopped in the doorway. Millie was seated at the piano, with Grace tucked right beside her on the bench, watching her grandmother's fingers move across the keys with wide, fascinated eyes. "Place your fingers like this," Millie was saying, gently demonstrating. "Now press down softly." Grace pressed the key. A clear, clean note rang out. Her whole face lit up. Millie smiled, and it was unlike any smile Lydia had ever seen from her. "Very good. My mother taught me when I was about your age." "Was she good?" Grace asked. "She was extraordinary," Millie said, her voice softening with the memory. "She performed in concert halls all across Europe." Lydia slipped away quietly, not wanting to break the moment. She found Naomi on the back deck, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I just watched your mother give Grace a piano lesson," Lydia said. Naomi raised her eyebrows. "That is unexpected. My mom doesn't open up to people easily." "I think Grace reminds her of her own mother." Naomi took a slow sip, thinking it over. Maybe. Or maybe she's finally starting to see what she's been missing. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Naomi spoke again, her voice dropping. "There's something you should know about Daniel. You weren't the first person he hurt." "What do you mean?" Lydia asked. "Daniel was always my mom's favorite," Naomi said. "She never let him face real consequences for anything. I love my brother, but he grew up believing he could get away with whatever he wanted, because he always did." Back in Boston, Ryan Cole arrived at work unsettled. After clocking in, he went straight to his supervisor's office. "I need to report something," he said, visibly on edge. "Millie Caldwell approached me yesterday and offered me money to falsify DNA test results." In Newport, Richard invited Lydia for a walk on the beach while Naomi kept an eye on Lily and Grace as they built sandcastles near the water's edge. "Lydia, I've been looking at your background and your coursework," Richard began. "You have a real natural talent for numbers and organization." "Thank you," she said, a little guarded. "Caldwell Enterprises has a community impact division. We fund educational programs and local initiatives. That area could really benefit from someone with your perspective." Lydia slowed her pace. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm saying it's a real possibility," Richard said. "This isn't charity, it's recognizing ability. Think about it." They kept walking until Richard suddenly stopped and pressed a hand to his chest. "Are you okay?" "Just indigestion," he said, trying to wave it off. "You're sweating and it's December," Lydia said firmly. "We're going back to the house right now." At lunch, Richard barely touched his food. His breathing was heavier than it should have been. "Dad, you look awful," Naomi said, worry breaking through. "I'm fine," he insisted, and then a wave of pain cut the words short. Lydia recognized the signs immediately. "My grandfather had heart problems. You're showing the exact same symptoms he had before his heart attack. We need to get to a hospital, now." Millie came back from the piano room, took one look at her husband, and went pale. Within minutes, they were helping Richard to the car. Millie drove. Lydia sat beside him in the back seat, watching him closely, tracking every sign. "The girls?" Richard asked, his voice weak. "Naomi's with them," Lydia said. "Just stay calm." At Newport Hospital, the doctors took Richard back for tests immediately. Lydia, Millie, and Naomi sat together in the emergency waiting room, mostly in silence. After a long stretch of quiet, Millie turned to Lydia. "How did you know?" "My grandfather had the same condition," Lydia said. "I recognized the signs." Millie nodded slowly. "Thank you for catching it." Hours later, a doctor came out to speak with them. "Mrs. Caldwell, your husband has angina, a condition caused by reduced blood flow to the heart. It's manageable with medication and lifestyle changes, but we'd like to keep him overnight for observation." When they were finally allowed in to see him, Richard looked tired but calm. "The doctor told me you already knew about this," Millie said, her voice firm. 6 months, he admitted. "I didn't want to worry anyone." "That was not a smart decision," she replied, but her voice came out softer than she intended. Before they left for the night, Richard asked to speak with Lydia alone. "Thank you for acting as fast as you did," he said from the hospital bed. "The doctor said your insistence made a real difference. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Richard said. "Think about what I said regarding Caldwell Enterprises. You belong there." He paused. "And Lydia, those girls are lucky to have you as their mother. I hope you know that." Back at the house, Millie surprised Lydia by asking her to sit down for tea in the kitchen. "I wasn't fair to you," she admitted, stirring her cup slowly. "I had someone investigate your background." "I know," Lydia said. "What you did, raising 2 daughters on your own, keeping up with school, holding on to your dignity through all of it." Millie paused like the words were costing her something. "It's remarkable." Lydia looked at her and saw something in her eyes she hadn't seen before. Respect. The moment was cut short by Naomi rushing in with a tablet in her hand. "You both need to see this." The Boston Globe headline filled the screen. "Caldwell matriarch attempted to bribe lab technician to falsify DNA results in paternity scandal." Millie grabbed the tablet from her daughter's hands. The article laid out exactly how she had offered Ryan Cole money to alter the results, and how Cole had reported it and recorded the entire conversation. "This is a disaster," Millie whispered. The weekend ended abruptly. They packed up and drove back to Boston, where Richard was transferred to Massachusetts General Hospital for additional monitoring. By Monday morning, the story had exploded across every news outlet in the city. Lydia kept the girls inside the apartment, away from the reporters who had started gathering outside. Naomi showed up around noon. Caldwell Enterprises stock dropped 15% since the market opened. Dad called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow, and he's demanding to be discharged today. From his hospital bed, Lydia asked. You know how he is, Naomi said with a small shrug. That evening, there was a knock at the apartment door. Lydia opened it carefully. It was Daniel. He wasn't angry, he wasn't drunk, he was just different. His face was tired, his shoulders carrying a weight he usually kept hidden behind walls. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, he said before she could speak, but I needed to come. Lydia stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she stepped aside and let him in. Lily and Grace were in the living room watching cartoons. When they saw Daniel, they both went still. So did he, like he genuinely didn't know what to do with two small pairs of eyes looking up at him. Hey, he said, in a voice that was surprisingly gentle. Lily tilted her head, studying him. Are you our dad? Daniel swallowed hard. Yeah, I am. Grace slid off the couch and walked right up to him, holding out her stuffed bear. When we're sad, the bear helps. Daniel stared at the little stuffed animal for a second. Then he crouched down to their level and took it carefully. Thank you, he said, his voice breaking just slightly. Lydia watched from the kitchen doorway without making a sound. It was the first time she had ever seen him without armor. He didn't stay long. On his way out, he stopped in the hallway and spoke quietly without turning around. I was wrong, with you and with them. A pause. I don't know how to fix it yet, but I want to try. Lydia didn't answer, but she didn't close the door until his footsteps had already faded down the hall. The next morning, Richard checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice and came in to chair the board meeting. Lydia got a call asking her to be there. Me? She said, surprised. Dad's orders, Naomi said. I've got the girls. The Caldwell Enterprises boardroom was packed with tense executives. Richard sat at the head of the table, pale but absolutely determined. Millie stood behind him, her expression a carefully controlled mask. Daniel sat off to the side, quiet. We are facing a serious crisis, Richard began. Our stock has dropped. The Westbrook Banking Group has pulled out of all negotiations. Our public image has taken a significant hit. He paused, then looked directly at Lydia. We need new leadership in our Community Impact Division, someone with integrity and genuine intelligence. Based on everything I've observed, I am offering Lydia Walker the position of Director of Operations for the Caldwell Enterprises Community Impact Division. The room broke into murmurs. An older board member spoke up. With all due respect, Richard, this young woman was a housekeeper in your home 3 years ago. How could she possibly be qualified for an executive role? She was studying accounting until a personal tragedy forced her to stop, Richard said firmly. She raised 2 daughters on her own, worked 2 jobs, and never once stopped pursuing her education. That takes more competence than most of the resumes that have crossed this table. Another board member frowned. Given the current scandal, the optics of this decision. Optics? Richard cut him off. Millie Caldwell attempted to bribe a lab technician to cover up the paternity of her own grandchildren. Lydia Walker, on the other hand, raised those children with dignity and zero support. So don't talk to me about optics. Daniel was on his feet suddenly, his jaw tight. This is absurd. You're putting a former employee above your own family. Daniel, sit down, Richard said, his voice low and sharp. No! Daniel's hand hit the table. Does anyone here even know that he has a heart condition he's been hiding? That he collapsed in Newport? He shouldn't even be in this room right now. The room went dead silent. Richard's face went even paler. Every eye in the room shifted to him. That's enough, Daniel, he said quietly. You're really going to push me aside for her? Daniel continued, his voice cracking now. After everything I've stood for in this company. What exactly have you stood for? Richard asked, his voice losing its strength. You let your mother operate in the shadows while you looked the other way. Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. That was when Richard's hand went to his chest. His breathing turned heavy, his eyes losing focus for just a moment. "Richard!" Millie moved toward him, and for the first time, her face was completely unguarded. Richard tried to push himself up from the chair and collapsed back into it. "Call an ambulance," he managed, before his eyes closed. The room erupted. Lydia was at his side in seconds, loosening his tie, checking his breathing, while someone across the room was already on the phone with emergency services. "He's breathing, pulse is weak," she said, keeping her voice steady. "We need to keep him still until they get here." Daniel had stepped back, staring at his father with an expression Lydia had never seen on his face before. It wasn't anger, it was fear. The paramedics arrived quickly, stabilized Richard, and rushed him back to Massachusetts General. Millie climbed into the ambulance without a word to anyone. Lydia stood in the middle of the boardroom, not entirely sure what to do next. Naomi called a few minutes later. "I already heard. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Lydia said. "Your father's on his way back to the hospital. Daniel's still here." "Don't leave," Naomi said. "The board needs someone steady in that room right now." Lydia looked around. Several board members were already making their way toward her. "Miss Walker," one of them said, "given the circumstances, would you be willing to tell us more about the position Richard proposed for you?" She spent the next hour walking them through her background and her ideas for the community division. The board listened, really listened, in a way she hadn't expected. "You have a perspective that most of the executives in this room will never have," an older member said. "You actually understand what these programs are supposed to do for real people." By evening, Richard had been stabilized. Millie, who had stayed at the hospital, made a decision that caught everyone off guard. She called a press conference outside Massachusetts General. "My husband is in stable condition and receiving excellent care," she said, standing in front of the cameras, composed as ever. "During his recovery, Caldwell Enterprises will continue to operate as normal. My son Daniel will be stepping back from all decision-making indefinitely." She paused. "I also want to take this opportunity to formally acknowledge my granddaughters, Lily and Grace Walker. They are part of this family, and we are committed to their well-being." Lydia watched it all from the apartment television, completely stunned. Naomi arrived shortly after, carrying dinner. "My mother just publicly acknowledged the girls," she said, still processing it herself. "I genuinely never thought I'd see that." "Everything is moving so fast," Lydia said, watching Lily and Grace eat at the kitchen table. "This morning I was just Lydia Walker, single mum. Now I'm potentially an executive with daughters who've been publicly recognized by one of the wealthiest families in Boston." Naomi reached over and squeezed her hand. "My dad saw something in you from the very beginning, and after everything that's come out, my mum is finally starting to see it too." Later that evening, Lydia went to the hospital to visit Richard. He was awake, his face tired but lighter somehow. "Sounds like the board was receptive," he said, with a faint smile. "They seem to be," she admitted. Richard's expression shifted to something more serious. "Lydia, I need to ask you something important. The financial irregularities I mentioned in the meeting, they're worse than what I let on. Someone has been siphoning money out of the community division for years, through a network of shell companies." She held his gaze. "How much money?" "Possibly millions," he said. "I need someone I can trust to dig into it. Someone with accounting skills and no internal loyalties." "That's why you offered me the job." "Partly," he admitted. "But I meant everything I said about your qualifications. Will you help me?" "Yes," Lydia said, without hesitating for a second. The next morning, Lydia walked into Caldwell Enterprises as an employee for the first time. Naomi met her in the lobby. "Ready for day one?" "Honestly, no," Lydia said, "but I'll figure it out." The office on the 20th floor was bigger than her entire apartment back in Portland. All the community division's files were already pulled up on the computer, waiting for her. By lunch, she'd found the first red flag: recurring payments to a company called MC Educational Partners for services that were never actually described. "MC," she murmured. "Millie Caldwell." She kept going and found three more: Blue Shore Investments, Caldwell Future Holdings, and Beacon Ridge Capital. All of them receiving large payments every quarter, all of them with vague, unspecified descriptions. That evening, she brought everything to Richard at the hospital. "These companies all follow the same pattern," she said, walking him through the spreadsheet. Large transfers, no documentation of any actual services. I suspected as much, he said. I need access to deeper records to trace where the money went after these transfers. Naomi can help you get that, Richard said. But be careful. There are still people inside the company who are loyal to Millie. The following day, Millie called Lydia at the office. Grace has been asking about piano lessons, she said, getting straight to the point. I want to hire her a teacher. That's incredibly generous, but I can't possibly... I'm not asking you to pay for it, Millie interrupted. She's my granddaughter. That kind of talent needs to be developed. Come to the mansion after work tonight and bring the girls. We'll have dinner. That night, Lydia and the girls had their first dinner at the Caldwell mansion without Richard. Millie had instructed the chef to prepare something the girls would actually enjoy. This house is so big, Lily said, looking around at the ceilings and doorways. Lily, Lydia murmured, a gentle warning in her voice. It's all right, Millie said. It is big, too big, honestly, especially with Richard still in the hospital. After dinner, Millie walked Grace to the music room. I've arranged for Professor James Laurent from the Berklee College of Music to come and assess Grace's aptitude, she told Lydia. Berklee? Lydia couldn't hide her surprise. That's one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Only the best for a Caldwell, Millie said simply. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep in one of the mansion's guest rooms, Lydia took her laptop over to Naomi's apartment. I found at least 4 suspicious companies, she said, walking her through everything, all of them receiving regular payments from the community funds with zero documentation. Naomi logged into the financial system with her executive credentials. Let's see where the money went after those transfers. They worked past midnight, tracing the trail, and it led straight to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Every single one connected directly to Millie. This is so much worse than I thought, Naomi said, staring at the screen. My own mother has been stealing from this company for years. Millions of dollars, Lydia murmured. But why? This family already has more money than they could spend. The Westbrook Banking Group merger, Naomi said suddenly, her eyes going wide. She needed their banking connections to help bury the trail. Lydia felt her stomach drop. And when I showed up with the girls and threatened that deal, you became a much bigger problem than just a reputational risk, Naomi finished, her voice barely above a whisper. The next morning, Lydia brought Lily and Grace to the hospital to visit Richard. The girls were a little nervous around all the medical equipment at first, but the second he smiled at them, they relaxed completely. Come here, you two, he said, making room on the edge of the bed. I want to tell you the story of how Caldwell Enterprises got started. The girls settled in and listened as he told it simply, the way you'd tell a story to children. It started with one computer in a tiny little room, he said. I solved problems for other businesses. Then I hired one person to help, then another, and it just kept growing from there. Lily tilted her head, genuinely curious. Was your office as big as Mommy's? Richard laughed, a real, full laugh that was good to hear. At the beginning, it was smaller than your bedroom. While a nurse came in to distract the girls with juice boxes, Richard lowered his voice. How's the investigation going? We traced the transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Lydia said quietly. All of them tied to Millie. Richard closed his eyes for just a moment. We need to document everything carefully before we take it to the board. 2 days later, Lydia and Naomi had enough. But instead of going straight to the board, Naomi made a different call. Daniel needs to hear this first, she said. He's her son. This is going to break something in him. He can't walk into this blind. Lydia hesitated. You really think he'll want to hear it from me? No, Naomi admitted, but he needs to. They met at Naomi's apartment that evening. Daniel showed up tense, clearly bracing himself without knowing what for. When he saw Lydia sitting at the table with her laptop open, he crossed his arms. What is this? Sit down, Naomi said, no room for negotiation in her voice. For the next hour, Lydia walked through every document without commentary. The shell companies, the unrecorded payments, the trail of transfers leading directly to Cayman Island accounts, all of them in Millie Caldwell's name. At first, Daniel pushed back on everything, looking for holes in every piece of evidence. His voice stayed controlled. His hands on the table did not. Slowly, the objections stopped coming. She actually did this, he said finally, more to himself than to either of them. How long? At least 5 years, Lydia said carefully. Daniel stood up and walked to the window. He stayed there with his back to them for a long moment. And the Westbrook merger was supposed to cover it all up. Yes, Naomi confirmed, her voice thick. And then Lydia showed up with the girls and threatened the whole thing. She panicked, Daniel finished. He turned around. His face was different. No anger, no resistance. Just the weight of something that couldn't be undone. His eyes found Lydia's. I put everything on you, he said, while she was doing all of this. Lydia didn't respond. But this time she didn't look away either. After midnight, Millie let herself into the mansion with her key and went straight to Richard's study. She started going through files, drawers, anything she could find, searching for something she could use. In the bottom drawer of his desk, she found a locked box. She pried it open and found old, yellowed documents inside, papers that revealed something very few people knew. Richard had grown up in a working-class family in Chicago. The seed money that launched Caldwell Enterprises had come from Millie's own father, a fact the family had kept buried for decades to protect the image they'd built. Millie stared at the papers for a long moment. What she didn't know was that Naomi had quietly installed small security cameras in her father's study after recent events. Everything was being recorded and sent directly to Naomi's phone in real time. Across the city, Naomi woke up to the alerts. She watched in disbelief and immediately called Lydia and Daniel. My mother is in Dad's study right now, she said. I'm watching it live. All three of them were at the mansion within minutes. Naomi pushed open the study door and found Millie still holding the documents. What are you looking for, Mom? Naomi asked, her voice low and even. Millie looked up, composed herself quickly. This is my home. I don't owe anyone an explanation. Daniel stepped in behind his sister, his eyes going straight to the papers in his mother's hands. After everything we found about the accounts, and now this. His voice was heavy. It's over, Mom. Millie looked at her son. Everything I did was to protect this family. You protected yourself, Daniel said, steady and firm. Lydia stayed in the doorway, watching in silence. Naomi held up her phone. We have every second of this recorded. Millie's expression hardened. So you wouldn't use that against me? Naomi didn't flinch. Then don't make me. The next morning, Richard came home from the hospital. He walked into the mansion, still carrying his discharge bag, when Daniel and Naomi met him in the entryway. Their faces told him everything before a single word was spoken. What happened? He asked, stopping in the middle of the hall. They sat down together. Daniel and Naomi laid it all out. The shell companies, the transfers, the Cayman Island accounts. And finally, the footage from the study. Richard watched the video in complete silence. When it ended, he sat looking at the table for a long moment. Then he stood slowly and walked to the window. Where is she? He asked, in a voice Naomi had never heard from her father before. Millie came down the staircase at that exact moment, as if she already knew. She was immaculate as always, perfect posture, controlled expression. Richard, she said carefully. He turned to face her. How long? He asked. Direct, no preamble. I can explain. How long, Millie? She held his gaze for just a second. 5 years. The silence that followed was too heavy for the room. 5 years, Richard repeated, his voice low and sharp as a blade. While I was building this company, while I was getting sick, while I was trying to do the right thing by those girls, you were stealing from me. I was protecting what we built, she said, lifting her chin. I have always been too trusting with money, Richard. Someone had to make sure this family had a future. Protecting our future. His voice finally rose. You created shell companies. You siphoned millions. You tried to bribe someone to deny your own granddaughters. And then you broke into my office in the middle of the night. That is not protecting a family. That is destroying one. I did what had to be done, she said, unmoved. What had to be done, Richard repeated, a bitter edge in his voice. Lydia walked through that door with 2 children who are our own blood, and your answer was to try to buy her silence. And the whole time, you were sitting at my hospital bedside, holding my hand and smiling. Millie's mask finally cracked. You think that was easy? Her voice came out different, raw, carrying something no one had expected to hear. Watching everything we spent our lives building get threatened by a woman who got involved with our son. Nobody got involved with anybody, Daniel cut in, stepping forward to stand beside his father. I made choices, and I was too much of a coward to own them. But what you did, Mom, there's no justifying that. Millie looked at her son as if he had just struck her. Richard walked to the desk and pressed both hands flat against it, facing his wife directly. I'm taking the evidence to the board, and I'll cooperate with whatever investigation follows. He paused. But I cannot do any of that with you still inside this company. Richard, you are removed from Caldwell Enterprises, effective today. He held her gaze. And I need time to figure out if I can even look at you the same way again. The color drained from Millie's face. Naomi gently took hold of her father's arm, as if she was afraid he might go down again. Daniel stood completely still, watching his mother with an expression caught somewhere between grief and resolve, and Millie Caldwell, for the first time in her life, had nothing to say. The morning after the confrontation, Richard was discharged from the hospital. Lydia picked him up with Lily and Grace buzzing with excitement in the back seat. "Grandpa," they called out the moment he appeared at the exit, being pushed in a wheelchair by a nurse. "Hospital rules," he said with a tired smile. "I walk perfectly fine." On the drive back, Lydia filled him in on the final details of the investigation. Richard listened quietly, watching the city pass outside the window. "I spent decades building all of this," he said finally. "I never imagined the biggest threat would come from inside my own home." Back at the mansion, Daniel and Naomi were waiting with a stack of documents spread across the table. "Welcome back," Naomi said, hugging her father carefully. "We have a lot to work through." The next day, the Caldwell Enterprises board convened for an emergency session. Richard sat at the head of the table, still pale, but his voice was steady and clear. Lydia sat beside Daniel. Naomi stood behind her father. Richard laid out everything. The shell companies, the systematic transfers, the Cayman Island accounts tied directly to Millie. "It was Miss Walker's analysis that uncovered what our own auditors missed for years," he said. "That is exactly why she is leading our Community Impact Division." Harold Pierce, one of the older board members, frowned. "With all due respect, Richard, her background still raises concerns for some of us on this board." Daniel stepped in before his father could respond. "Lydia recognized my father's cardiac symptoms when none of the rest of us did. She uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud that had been buried inside this company for years. And she raised 2 daughters completely on her own without asking anyone for a single thing." He looked directly at Pierce. "If that raises concerns, the problem is yours, not hers." The room went quiet. "Lydia stays," Richard confirmed, "and this board needs to vote right now on the permanent removal of Millie Caldwell from all positions and decisions within this company." The vote was unanimous. That afternoon, Richard received a call from the prosecutor's office. "They're offering a deal," he told Daniel and Naomi afterward. "Full restitution and a permanent separation from the company in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Will she take it?" Naomi asked. Richard looked out the window for a moment. "She doesn't have a choice." A few days later, a new challenge surfaced, enrolling Lily and Grace in school. Richard suggested Brookline Academy. "They're 4 years old," Lydia said, weighing it. "Isn't that a pretty formal environment for their age?" "Their early childhood program is excellent," Richard assured her, "worth seeing in person." The campus was beautiful. Small class sizes, thoughtful layout, clearly well cared for. Director Warren met them personally at the entrance. "It would be an honor to welcome the Caldwell girls," he said warmly. "Walker," Lydia corrected, with a calm smile. "Their last name is Walker." The director flushed slightly. "Of course, my apologies." Lily made a beeline for the science room, immediately drawn to the rocks and plants on display. Grace stayed close to her mother, holding her hand, taking everything in with wide, careful eyes. "Some children settle in faster than others," Director Warren said gently. "We have a lot of experience helping with that transition." That evening, Lydia sat with Grace as she worked through her reading, while Lily played nearby. "Are we going to that new school?" Grace asked quietly. "Would you want to?" Grace shrugged. "Lily wants to, but it's really big." "New things can feel scary," Lydia said, pulling her daughter close. but I'll be right there with you every single step." 2 days later, Millie's attorney confirmed she had accepted the deal. Full financial restitution, probation, and a permanent separation from Caldwell Enterprises. That same day, Elisa Westbrook reached out to Daniel and asked him to meet her at a quiet cafe downtown. She arrived looking polished and distant, the way she always did, but her eyes were different. "I had you looked into," she said, before Daniel could get a word in. "Not because I doubted everything, but because I needed to know the truth." Daniel said nothing. "The girls are real. The DNA confirmed it, and you spent months trying to cover it up." She set the ring on the table slowly, deliberately. "I deserve someone who's honest with me, Daniel, even when it's hard." "Elisa, no." She stood up. "Good luck with your daughters, I mean that." And she walked out without looking back. Daniel sat there staring at the ring for a long time. The following week, Richard, Naomi, and Daniel sat down with the family attorneys to establish legal guardianship agreements for Lily and Grace. "We need to make sure the girls are protected no matter what happens," Richard said. The documents named Richard as secondary guardian, Naomi as third, and Daniel as fourth, an inclusion Lydia hadn't anticipated. "You didn't have to do that," she told Richard afterward. "He's their father," Richard said simply, "and he's trying to be better. That counts." After the meeting, Daniel asked Lydia to walk with him through the mansion's garden. They moved in silence for a while before he stopped. "I was a coward," he said, no softening around it. "When you told me you were pregnant, I panicked and let my mother take over. I stood on that staircase and watched her send you away, and I did nothing." Lydia didn't respond. "You raised 2 daughters completely on your own while I went on living my life like nothing had happened." He looked at her directly. "There's no excuse for that." "No," Lydia agreed quietly. "There isn't. I know I can't get that time back," he said, "but I want to be present from here on out. For Lily and Grace." A pause. "If you'll let me." Lydia looked out at the garden for a moment. "They need a father," she said finally. "Not a perfect one, just one who shows up." Daniel nodded, with the weight of someone who understood that what he'd just been handed was equal parts second chance and responsibility. 1 year later, Lydia was at her desk at Caldwell Enterprises, looking out at the Boston skyline. On the corner of her desk sat a framed photo. Lily and Grace, now 5 years old, sitting in the grass on the mansion lawn with Richard behind them, grinning. The door opened. Naomi, carrying 2 coffees. "Ready? The South Boston Education Center opens in 2 hours." Lydia took the coffee and smiled, almost just going over the speech one more time. The center was her first major project as head of the Community Impact Division, free tutoring, computer access, and career guidance for low-income youth. She had designed it thinking about the resources she wished she'd had when she was forced to drop out. "The girls are so excited about the birthday party tomorrow," Naomi said. "Richard's been planning it for weeks." "I asked him to keep it simple," Lydia sighed. "But it's Richard Caldwell," Naomi said, smiling. "Simple is not in that man's vocabulary." Later that morning, Lydia stood beside Richard as they cut the ribbon on the center. Local news cameras caught the moment. The crowd applauded. "This center is going to create real opportunities for hundreds of young people," Lydia told a reporter. "Access to education shouldn't depend on what zip code you were born in or how much money your family has." Richard watched her field questions from the press with confidence and ease, visibly proud. His health had stabilized with medication and a less demanding schedule. "You've accomplished more in 1 year than most executives manage in 5, he told her on the way back to the office. "The board is genuinely impressed." "I had good motivation," Lydia said. "Every time I visit a school or a community center, I think about what it felt like to have my own education taken away." That evening, Lily and Grace turned 5 in the mansion garden. Despite Lydia's request for something low-key, Richard had arranged a photographer, custom cakes, and a small petting zoo for the kids. "Grandpa, look at the baby goat," Lily called out, tugging his hand toward the animal pen. He went without a second of hesitation, crouching right down beside her. "Pretty cute, isn't it?" Across the lawn, Grace was at the portable keyboard that had been set up for the party, playing a simple minuet for Professor Laurent. He listened with a genuine smile, clearly impressed with how far she'd come. Lydia watched it all with a kind of gratitude that didn't have words. She and the girls were living in a renovated wing of the mansion now, close enough for family and connection, separate enough to feel like their own home. In the middle of the party, Daniel came through the garden gate with a wrapped gift in each hand. Lily and Grace spotted him immediately and ran. "Dad!" they called out together. He crouched down and caught them both at once, holding them for a moment with his eyes closed. "Happy birthday," he said, his voice catching slightly. 5 years old, you two are getting so big." "Did you bring presents?" Lily asked, already eyeing the boxes. "Obviously," he laughed, "one for each of you." Lydia watched from a distance. Daniel was still learning. There were still stumbles, still moments of uncertainty. But he was there. And for now, that was what mattered. The party was still going when Clara slipped quietly to Lydia's side. "Mrs. Millie is at the entrance," she said, lowering her voice. "She's asking if she may come in." Lydia was still for a moment. Then she nodded. Millie walked into the garden with the same posture she always carried, straight, composed, impeccable. But something about her was different. The sharp, calculating edge in her eyes was gone. In its place was something Lydia had never expected to see there: shame. Naomi noticed her first and crossed her arms but said nothing. Daniel looked at his mother for a long moment, then he turned his attention back to his daughters without moving toward her. Millie approached Lily and Grace carefully. "Happy birthday," she said softly, placing a small wrapped gift in each of their hands. Lily glanced at her mother, waiting for a cue. Lydia gave a small nod. "Thank you, Grandma," Grace said, with the kind of simple open warmth that only small children can carry without effort. Something in Millie's face gave way for just a second. Later, as the party began to wind down, Millie found Richard sitting alone on the patio, watching the last of the guests move through the garden. "May I sit?" she asked. Richard didn't answer right away. After a moment, he gestured to the chair beside him. They sat in silence for a while. "I came because I wanted to see the girls," Millie said finally, "and because I needed to see you." "You've seen me," Richard replied, his voice low and far away. "Richard." "Millie." He turned to look at her for the first time. "I've spent the entire year trying to understand how the woman I was married to for decades could do all of this without me ever seeing it. And you know what the hardest part is?" She waited. "It's not the fraud. It's not the money." He paused. "It's that I look at you now and I genuinely don't know whose side you're on anymore." "I have always been on your side," she said, her voice fracturing slightly. "Your version of it," Richard replied. "Which wasn't the same as mine." Millie started to speak, but he kept going. "I don't know if I can find my way back to where we were." He looked out at the garden, where Lily and Grace were still running around with the last few guests. "What I do know is that those girls deserve a stable family, and I'm going to make sure they have one, whether the two of us figure this out or not." Millie looked at her husband for a long moment, and for the second time, she had nothing to say. She stood slowly, smoothed her coat, and walked back into the mansion, leaving Richard alone with the distant sound of his granddaughter's laughter floating in from the garden. A few weeks later, Lydia and Naomi had their usual weekly lunch at a cafe near the office. "Do you remember the first time you went shopping with the girls and you were terrified to spend any money?" Naomi asked, smiling. "I still calculate the cost per wear of everything I buy," Lydia admitted, laughing. "Some habits just stick," Naomi agreed. "Speaking of which, did you finish reviewing the scholarship applications? 20 students with full funding for community college. The board approved it yesterday." Naomi shook her head, genuinely moved. 20 lives changed. That's what I love about what you're doing. It's not abstract. It's real help for real people. The following weekend, preparations for the annual Caldwell Foundation Gala were in full swing. This year's event was intentionally different, smaller, focused on community impact rather than social prestige. Lydia helped Lily and Grace pick out their dresses. The two girls had designed them together with a local seamstress, different from each other, but clearly a matching set. "Is there going to be dancing?" Grace asked, spinning in hers. "There is," Lydia promised. "Are people going to stare at us?" Lily asked, always the more perceptive one. Lydia crouched down to her level. "Maybe, but this time, Everyone in that room knows exactly who you are. You belong there. The night of the gala arrived. The mansion was elegant without being over the top. The guest list was filled with community leaders, educators, and business partners. Lily and Grace sat with Richard, watching with wide, proud eyes as Lydia accepted an award for her work leading the Community Impact Division. Lydia stepped up to the podium, thinking about the last time she'd stood in this same room and how different everything had been. "Thank you for this honor," she began. "When I started working with Caldwell Enterprises, I had one goal: to create opportunities for people who needed a second chance. Because sometimes life takes us down roads we never planned for." She looked out at her daughters, at Richard. "What matters isn't the path we mapped out for ourselves. It's the journey we choose to embrace, and the truth we decide to live." After the gala, with the girls already asleep, Lydia was sitting at the small desk in her wing of the mansion when a quiet knock came at the door. "Daniel." "Sorry for the hour," he said. "I needed to say this before the day was over." Lydia stepped back and let him in. He stood in the middle of the room like he was pulling the words from somewhere deep. "I hurt you in ways I can't undo," he said, straight out. "But I need you to know that the person I was back then, that's not who I want to be anymore. Not for the girls, and not for you." Lydia was quiet. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I just needed you to know." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said finally. "And the girls are starting to see it too." Daniel nodded, carrying both the weight and the relief of someone who had finally said the thing that needed to be said. The next morning, Lydia found Daniel in the music room with Grace. He was sitting beside her on the piano bench, listening as she played the new piece she'd learned from Professor Laurent. "That was beautiful, Grace," he said when she finished. Grace lit up completely. "Want to hear it again?" "Always," he said, without a second of hesitation. Lydia watched from the doorway without making a sound. There was something in that quiet, ordinary moment that no legal agreement, no board meeting, and no news headline could ever come close to capturing. Just a father and his daughter, starting where they should have started all along. In another part of the mansion, Richard and Naomi were working through proposals at the desk, while Lily planted flowers in the garden with Clara, focused and serious, the way she always was about things that mattered to her. That night, after tucking the girls in, Lydia sat on the edge of Lily's bed a little longer than usual. "Mommy," Lily asked, her voice heavy with sleep, "are we a real family now?" Lydia smiled and brushed the hair from her daughter's forehead. "We've always been a real family, baby. The rest of the world just took a while to catch up." Lily thought about that for a second, then her eyes closed, and she was satisfied. Lydia pulled the door shut softly and stood in the hallway for a moment, just listening to the quiet of the house. Downstairs, she could hear Richard and Naomi still talking, going over the details of tomorrow's board meeting, where Lydia would be presenting the expanded educational program proposal. 3 years ago, she had come back to Boston asking for recognition for her daughters. What she found instead was something no one had seen coming: a new definition of family. Built not on social expectations or old money or last names, built on truth, on forgiveness, on second chances. Lydia walked down the stairs to join Richard and Naomi, ready to keep building the future that had started with one courageous decision and 2 little girls in matching pink dresses, smiling up at her from the garden. If Lydia's story moved you, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It helps the channel grow and tells me you want more stories like this one. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new chapter. And drop a comment below. Do you think Daniel and Lydia still have a future together? I really want to hear what you think. See you in the next one.